Did Jeffrey Epstein help Bear Stearns hide toxic assets and then get a bailout? The short answer is yes. If you haven't seen the Jeffrey Epstein crime map, I would implore you to check this out first. Exploring this further, we're going to look at the connections of Jeffrey Epstein and Bear Stearns. Just what did he do for them? Jeffrey Epstein helped set up a structured investment vehicle, also called a SIV or SIV. The SIV he set up was in Bermuda, called Liquid Funding LDT. Liquid Funding LDT was 40% financed just by Jeffrey Epstein. If you'd like to know about the other 60%, you may have at this tangled web of mess. But just know, the important sector that we're going over today is all from Epstein, and that's 40% of this SIV. Bear Stearns set up Bear Stearns Ireland Limited to get around US regulations, and then it had it create Liquid Funding LDT, and it had Epstein finance the largest portion of that. Liquid Funding LDT then issued commercial paper, which ended up in common money market funds. That means the common man was stuck with investments that were tainted by the faulty commercial paper, which was faulty because rating agencies were bribed to give Liquid Funding LDT AAA ratings and Tier 1 status. $139 million went to Dreyfus Money Market, $125 million went to Frank Russell Investment, and $100 million landed in JP Morgan's money market funds. But just what is an SIV and what is commercial paper? In my book, The Separation of Business and State, I explained. In regards to an SIV, in plain English, this refers to a fund usually offshore, which an investment bank creates to hide its official financial obligations. For example, if an investment bank issued $100 million worth of mortgages to homeowners, it may then create $100 million worth of IOUs and sell them to an SIV. IOUs on mortgages are called mortgage-backed securities. The SIV buys the mortgage-backed security with cash, and because they count as a separate company, the obligation on the debt is not recorded on the balance sheet of the parent investment bank. Here's the major problem though. In order to buy the bonds, the IOUs, the SIV sells its own bonds by issuing commercial paper, a promissory note that has to be repaid quickly after a set number of days, usually no more than 9 months at maximum. They normally carry high interest rates and can only be created by corporations with excellent credit ratings. Well, of course, that doesn't matter when the credit ratings are based on bribes. We learned more from the GOA, Government Accountability Office's audit conducted in 2011, where we learn about Bear Stearns window dressing. Quote, at the end of each quarter, Bear would lower its leverage ratio by selling assets, only to buy them back at the beginning of the next quarter. Bear and other firms booked these transactions as sales, even though the assets didn't stay off the balance sheet for long, in order to reduce the amount of the company's assets and lower its leverage ratio. Bear's former treasurer Upton called the move window dressing and said that it ensured that creditors and rating agencies were happy. Bear's public filings reflected this to some degree. For example, in 2007, the annual report said the balance sheet was approximately 12% lower than the average month-end balance over the previous 12 months. So just in time to fool the rating agencies, they would sell properties and then buy them back. That is collusion, that is conspiracy, that is illegal. Speaking of JP Morgan, you should see this later what they sent their shareholders. JP Morgan Chase, of course, would buy out Bear Stearns in what's called a fire sale. Pennies on the dollar. It's just a monopolization of financials. We learn from the GOA again. That the Federal Reserve Bank of New York floated a $28.8 billion into Bear Stearns to buy up their toxic assets. That was the senior loan. The subordinate loan came from JP Morgan Chase. They only put in $1.2 billion. That means the Federal Reserve threw in 25 times more than JP Morgan Chase. And of course, they did this through an intermediary. They set up Maiden Lane LLC, and they had them front the money. JP Morgan puts in a token amount, and they were able to purchase $80 billion worth of toxic assets from Bear Stearns. So this is just another bailout from the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. We would learn the Federal Reserve Bank of Washington, D.C., the Fed, would float in more than $800 billion in this scam. Of course, they're not really paying for that. You are. So it appears Alan C. Greenberg, or Ace Greenberg of Bear Stearns, and Jamie Dimon of JP Morgan Chase aren't so talented after all. They just engage in fraud. Very interestingly, a corporate officer for JP Morgan Chase, James E. Staley, met with Jeff Epstein after Epstein was convicted of soliciting prostitution from a minor in the state of Florida at his Florida residence in Palm Beach. He met him in person while Epstein is supposed to be in prison. Of course, he didn't really go to prison. He had 13 months of part-time prison where 6 days a week he basically got to leave 12 hours a day, and then he slept in an apartment adjacent to the prison, not even in real jail. But on his work release, which he did not qualify for, being a sex offender and rapist and all, he met with James E. Staley. What was so important that JP Morgan Chase had to send an individual to meet in person, not use the telephone or any electronic communication to talk to Epstein? Well. After the GOA audit, we discover that in 2011, liquid funding LDT resurfaced, this time for JP Morgan Chase. These people are psychopaths. They don't care what they have to do to gain leverage in the business world, including rape, theft, deception. They don't care how many people they hurt by stealing and lying, and they really don't care about these young girls. As we've all seen, the justice system has failed on Jeff Epstein. They have a second shot. How far and how deep will it go? Here's a missing piece of the puzzle. Maiden Lane LLC and JP Morgan Chase's toxic asset buyout of Bear Stearns occurred in May. However, liquid funding LDT had been paid for debt-free in April, a month before the purchase. How? Who bought all those toxic assets? If it's not the New York Federal Reserve and it's not JP Morgan Chase, then how did they become solvent? Was there another player that swooped in? Of course. If it was similar to the Hoffenberg scandal, the Ponzi scheme of which Jeff Epstein was a partner, then Epstein is acting as a middleman for a state, Israel, to launder money and monopolize financials via selective government bailouts. The Kushners did a very similar scheme through the Port Authority, which grants lucrative real estate contracts to New York and New Jersey, and it is chaired by AIPAC's former president. They would get a foreign state's backing to do buyouts and bribes, and then award themselves with U.S. state contracts to make tons of money. They would use this revenue to buy influence, and then it's a rinse and repeat game. You are getting taken to the cleaners by this clique of Zionist criminals. I have a film about what was going on specifically in New Jersey and New York with the Port Authority that goes all the way back through organized crime, September 11th, down back through time to the RFK assassination even. If you're interested in that sort of thing and you want to know the financial games, this white-collar crime in full detail, there is a film called Trump's Zionist Ball and Chain, God is Not a Real Estate Agent, available on ancreport.com. I encourage you to get that and understand that, because it's going to help you understand what's going on with Epstein, Bear Stearns, JP Morgan Chase, and so forth. We'll have more maps in the future. Be sure to smash that like button, share, and subscribe. And you can get a whole lot more content by following us on Patreon.